Welcome. Thank you for coming to my talk. As you can see, it's going to be a UI UX case study. So, just a little bit of information about me. In the last talk, I was reliably informed that you shouldn't really front load the beginning of your talk with loads of talk about yourself. So, picture of me. Isn't that just the epitome of business casual? I pretty much, that's dictionary definition. So I'm Paul Izod. I'm a UI developer over in IDEO, Business Technology. A UI developer is for the user interface, which is basically just the look and feel of our website. So I'm responsible for the front-end code for car, home, and van insurance websites of our various sort of 12-odd brands. And part of what we do as UI developers is we work with the front-end code, the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript to make our websites usable. It's the way our users interact with our brands. And everyone kind of thinks, you do the pretty things, you do pictures and you do colors and all of that sort of thing. And there's a lot more to what we do than just the basic sort of styling and whatnot. There's a lot of user experience work. Simon Moores was talking about the user's experience in the keynotes earlier, and that kind of jives with what we do. There's a lot more of theory and understanding of what people want and psychology and understanding how people interact with your UI, because that is fundamentally how the users experience your journeys. And we don't do an awful lot in IDEO of user experience and applying user experience principles to our web journey. And so I'm quite into that sort of stuff because I'm cool. And so I thought, how best to convince people that UX has some value and that there's more to UI and UX than just making things colorful. We've all heard of the phrase, show, don't tell. I'm doubling down, I'm showing you and telling you, which is always fun. So we have a few principles in our department, mainly around our digital transformation, which is to try and make things simpler and more intuitive, but also to try and make it so that we can be a digital-only proposition, so that users can just come and access our website online, and they don't need to do anything other than be online. They can go end-to-end, and whatever need they have, they can do it online. It's quite a big challenge, but it's part of fundamentally a user's experience. And so I set some time aside to go, right, we don't do any user experience particularly, so I'm going to do a little side project in my own time, and I'm going to prove that what value you can add just by applying some basic principles. So I had a few little parameters, my own time. I wasn't going to take any work time out of this. Also, if any of this is a little bit rough around the edges, it's mostly because it's been put together at about 3 a.m. with a screaming 7-month-old in the background, so it might be a little bit scatological, but you know. As I said, no budget, apart from what I could pilfer or I already owned, so there was a lot of stationery used from the cupboard and stuff like that, but other than that, there was no budget. And I had to use internal test candidates only. Now, for user experiences purposes, that's a terrible idea, because everyone in the company has a vested interest and is fundamentally understands insurance, theoretically, because they work in insurance companies. They're not a real representation of your users. So there are some certain handicaps and things to be bearing in mind, but that was the parameters that I set, because, you know, why not? So I picked one of our web pages. This, for those that don't know, is our renewals portal page. This is what happens when a customer who is already with us logs onto their self-service center and they're in the last month or so of their policy, and we go, please renew with us, we want your money. Yeah, I never liked this page very much. It's one of those pages where it's just sort of a bit of a patchwork, lots of different people worked on it, and yeah, I mean, look at it. So there is quite a lot to be getting on with there, and I just thought, I'm going to see if I can make this page better. I'll apply some usability principles, I'll go and talk to people, and see what we can do. So that's a real page, that is an actual. You should know this, you work on these. No, it is red, it's just a glare projector, yeah. And what's particularly great is if you push the more button, it gets worse, look at that. Oh. It's true. Well. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I decided I was going to take a look at this page and just go, I'm going to see what I can do. So I sat down and I thought, why don't I like this page? Why? I mean, there's a, it's got all the key information, you know, in theory. I mean, it works, sort of. People do renew. God love them. And so I had a bit of a think about why, and you kind of have to, as part of that, you try to go through the idea of going, what the customer do I want? What information do customers want? And my first thoughts when I was looking at it were that it's a bit busy. There's a lot of things clamoring for your information. There's no real coherent hierarchy. I mean, if I didn't know about insurance, I mean, I know what I'm meant to be looking for on there. I work in insurance, I have for 8 years, you know, but as someone who doesn't necessarily do insurance, as most of our customers are, that's probably going to be quite a confusing page. And maybe certain things aren't emphasized properly. So I kind of chunked up the page into its core data groups. I know, sexy, right? So there's 15 or 16 bits of data on that page, which is a pretty busy old page. You know, we've got the key information that we want to give, there's some information that customers need, and then there's all the stuff we have to put in there because otherwise we'll, you know, be shut down and stuff. So I sorted them into various categories. I'm not going to go through all of them piece by piece, as I'm sure you're very pleased to hear. But we have sort of initially the three primary bits, which were the button to renew, the renewal date data, so when it renews, when it's going to renew, it's quite important for the customer, and how much it's going to cost them. And then you've got a load of secondary stuff and some stuff. The tertiary stuff is basically stuff we have to put in there, but literally no one, neither us nor the customer, really cares about. And I'm probably not meant to say that, but it's true. And so I thought, how am I going to test this? Now, there's something called, in user experience, called a squint test, which is pretty much as you think about it. You look at it, squint your eyes and go, what stands out to me? Now, it's really hard to replicate that as a sort of measurable user test, because you can't just go, hey, fella, squint at this and tell me what looks right. So what I did was I created an outline of the page. It's very pretty. You can recognize that as the very red page I showed you earlier. And I've taken out all the copies. So the idea is just to focus on the visual hierarchy. And the idea was that I wanted to test to see which bits we were emphasizing visually without worrying too much about data and having to look through the information. And the way I figured I'd test that is we had 3 primary bits of data, as I referenced earlier. And so I gave each of my test subjects, I did a round of tests with 10 people. And then I just got them to stick a sticker on the 3 most important or prominent parts of the page. It looked a little something like that. Not the most scientific thing in the world, but it gives us an idea. In theory, if you've got 3 primary parts of your page, you probably want those to be the most visually prominent or important parts of the page. So I went out and tested. I did over the various rounds of testing, I tested about 50 people, all told, in various ways. I'm not going to go through every round of tests. That would take forever, and I don't have enough time. In fact, I'm halfway through already, blimey. I wasn't going to call it anything, but then I thought, how often do you get to present this and stuff? So this is going to be called the Izod method. Yeah. So I got 10 people to put stickers on what they thought was the most prominent and important parts of the page. Only 5 people put one on the primary action button. It's always a good sign. 10 people put it on this big chunk of information here, which basically said, this is your price, and here's some more information and loads of other guff. And 7 people put it on the massive header at the top that says your policy is going to renew in so many days. And then across the 10 people, there were 9 different sections selected, which tells you that there's a certain amount of confusion across people as to what was prominent. You probably don't want to say to 10 people, name 3 things on this page that are prominent, and have 9 different things selected across those 10 people. It shows that it kind of represents what they thought, that it was quite a busy page. And also, everyone knows you probably want more than half of the people selecting to say, yeah, the primary action button's one of the 3 most important things. That means 5 people didn't think the primary action button was important. It's not always a good thing. So I went through a round of tests where I just sort of moved some stuff around and changed the layout of things, thinking about what was key and emphasizing that. So this was my first redesign, quite a fundamental redesign difference. I tried to clear a lot of the busy chaff around and tried to sort of focus just on the core data. So I brought the price breakdown out of a pop-up and into the main point of the page. I made the primary action button bigger and bolder and more focused. I streamlined the design and added key data above the fold, which just means you don't have to scroll down to find it. It's not all that important, but you know. I ran the test again. All 10 people said the primary action button was important. That's always a good start. All 10 put it on the monthly premium section. Excellent. 4 people selected the more information button. And, you know, we had a couple of people select the header at the top. So we've kind of taken 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Loads of people know how to renew it. Less people know when it's going to renew. So I went through a couple more rounds of testing. Again, I'm not going to go through them all, but one interesting point is on this particular design, the only thing I changed was I made the whole header bold. I was like, I want them to see it. I want them to focus on it. I'll make it super bold. What happened? Less people selected it. Which is a really interesting point about user experience and usability. When people were passing through that information, there's the way you can tell what things are on there is because of a set of things called salient clues. It's a way things position themselves with proximity and shape and design and lots of things like that, which basically mean you can tell what things are. So just by an outline, you can tell that that's a header because it's got a logo and it's got a bit there. You can tell that that's some text. You can tell that's a list because it's got a little point and then a line, point and a line. So everyone looked at that because I asked people like, why didn't you select that? I was really trying hard for you to select that. Why didn't you select it? And they said, well, I just thought it was a header, so, headers aren't important, boring. And they kind of just completely gone. Didn't even register it. So it's just an illustration of things that sound like they should make sense. Make the header bolder, they'll see it more. Doesn't always work like that. And so that's part of the value of user experience. Things that you think are going to happen don't always do. Everything else remained the same, which is always good. If it had changed and I hadn't changed anything, that would be a bit worrying. So the next stage of my design process was to make a working prototype with color. Less color than the original, you notice, because, I don't want to overdo it. And I tried to focus on data and create a flow. So you sort of flow down here, you see that, the arrows point you to there, and then you flow down. And, oh, look, big button to bring in my policy. And I made it so that you could click on bits and they'd expand. And you could actually use it, and we could do some actual testing. So it looks a bit like that when you expand it. So, we don't have to show all of our data all of the time. We can just have, the less important bits there and expand. So I did a few more rounds of testing. I did a bunch of tests just recording the audio, and then did a bunch of tests recording the video. Paul Humphrey will know what I'm talking about, because that's a fabulously jury-rigged system where we sort of gaffer tape stuff together and we can film the thing. Now, when I was doing this, I wasn't planning on presenting it, so I didn't make a note of who all the people I test recorded. Why would I? So it makes it very difficult to ask their permission to play their voice up here. So I'm going to show you a brief bit of what I did with the video recording, you lucky people, with a man called Dave Biggs, who generously said I could show a clip of him talking while looking very bemused. So he did some task-based testing just to make sure that the flow worked. So
sometimes a little bit slow.
So that's an example of exciting testing in action. So after sort of 5 or 6 rounds of testing of various types, the fundamental takeaways I got from listening to what people were telling me was they wanted to see what last year's premium was. We weren't showing last year's premium on our current renewals policy. It's probably quite difficult to have someone make a decision, because hands up, anyone who knows exactly what they paid for their insurance last time they paid for their insurance. You sad people. Everyone else, well done, you're normal human beings. So that was like far and away the main thing that everyone told me. I want to know what last year's premium was. I can't renew if I don't know what it was. I don't know whether we went up or down or what. They wanted the option to decline, those miserable people. That's something that we've been working on separately, but it was part of my notion of what I was doing as part of this test was if the feedback was there, it was something that we'd look at feeding into this design. So I incorporated an option to actually decline your renewal. And when we had the accordion, the sort of expandable bit below the primary action buttons, no one even knew it was there, despite the big arrow. And when you pointed it out to them, they said, oh my God, I just didn't see that. Because again, they passed it through, it looked like a line, they saw the buttons, everything below that, not important, just subconsciously ignoring it. So I moved that above the primary action buttons. It's just little examples of things that you wouldn't think about, but you get from just testing. And I changed our traditional data information display. in our current design, all of our information is designed in a very sort of computer-based language. We have label, data. So we'll have first name, Paul, surname, Izod. Yeah, who talks like that? And it makes it harder for you to naturally understand that information. So I translated that into our additional information. So it will say, you have 9 years no claims discount. Makes it a lot easier to understand as a sentence because it's in a natural language. And the feedback that we got from the testing was that that was a lot better and a lot easier to use. So those takeaways meant that we went from this to this. Now, fundamentally, you might be looking at that and going, there's still a lot of stuff on that page. There's a lot of information. But I would argue that if you look at that, the right-hand one, the new one, is a lot clearer. It focuses on the data. There's a natural flow of the page. You look at when you look at a page, it's science proven that you take about 55 nanoseconds, I think it is, to look at a page, and you'll just pass that information through and you'll decide what's important and where you go. And the comments that we got were that you'd naturally flow. You'd look at the logo, you flow down, the arrows would go there, you go down there, and then you're at the button. You've kind of taken the key information that we want you to take. This is who you are, or this is who we are. This is your price. Here's the breakdown of the price. Here's what you paid last year. Please pay us. And that kind of worked, and people were using it, and the comments that we were getting, that it was much clearer, it was nice, they got the information. When we had the working prototype, I gave people tasks. I said, like you saw with Dave, I said, go and find how many drivers you got in your policy, without telling them where they'd find that, and test to make sure that they can get through and they can get that information. We don't just assume they'll know that, we hide drivers on there or things like that. And after the tests, I'd ask them, like, what is it you want? Like, what if you were looking at this and it was your renewal, would you renew? And if not, why? And if you would, why? Stuff like that. And it's that information that we took and we listened and I applied it and we got much more successful. And we ended up with a design that's clearer and more concise and has the information that our users actually want rather than what we think they want. And that's basically the main takeaway of this case study, is that user experience and UI can come together to make something that is more usable and easier to use and incorporates the information that users want, not what we think they want. Because the problem is, I'm a terrible example of what our customers would be. And with the greatest respect, you're all terrible examples of what our customers would be, because we know this stuff inside out to a greater or lesser extent, because we work in it day to day. So we know, NCD, we know drivers, we know what things, to a greater or lesser extent affect our insurance and what we should know. Our users don't necessarily know that, and I found that out just by going around our offices. And I targeted areas of the business that might not be quite so familiar with our journey. I tell you what, group audit, they love a survey. They love it. They insisted I came back. It was brilliant. And you try to target areas like, group comms and stuff like people that aren't necessarily at the rock face of our web journey all the way through. But if I can get this sort of change and this sort of information with a very cursory sort of jury-rigged test system and using flawed test subjects, imagine how much benefit we could have to the rest of the journey if we took time to actually ask our users what they wanted and how the journey makes them feel, and how much easier our whole journey could be to use. And it links in with Simon Moore's talk about like the experience and frictionless and everything. The idea is to make it as easy as possible for people using our websites to do what they want to do. And if you make it easier, they're much more likely to do what we want them to do, which is give us all their money. That is everything I had. I didn't have a slide that said questions because I figured my talk would be so comprehensive no one would have any questions. But do we have time for questions? Yes. Oh, there's loads. Are you going to just shout them at me? I don't need to run you the mic, do I? Just repeat. Okay, Tom. Oh, well, that's the thing. We are pushing, because we don't actually officially do anything with regard to official UX. It's still in its infancy. It's something of an advocacy sort of thing. There is a team being formed by Laura Mullaney. That's going to be more a case of a team that's going to do user experience research or customer experience research. They're going to have UX designers, although they're going to be more in the sort of higher level designing. And there's a ongoing debate at the moment as to where proper core fundamental UX will sit within that. But it is something that there is an appetite for. There are discussions ongoing. The stuff that I've demonstrated here, oh, this has a laser thing in it. I didn't need to bring my own. This, we're in the process now of redesigning our entire web journey. So some of the learnings that we took from this will be filtered in and inform on our new design, but that literally won't go in, sadly. It was more of a sort of demonstrable thought exercise. Does that answer you? Excellent, good. Did you have one, Steve? Well, it's... Well, the reason that we probably wouldn't implement this directly to live is that I will admit that this has been a sort of fairly stripped down process, you might have noticed. So I haven't necessarily consulted compliance or legal and stuff. I kind of assume that stuff's fine. I mean, I've jammed all the legal stuff at the bottom of the page. I don't see anyone having a problem with that. That's fine, right? There is a lot that we need to do. There's a lot more to this than just a very quick, I probably spent about 8 hours on this in total, maybe, give or take. There's a lot of other factors that need to be involved. There's business directives, there's legal, there's GDPR, there's IDD, there's all of this fun stuff. So yeah, I mean, this sort of situation that we've got here, yes, we need to look at providing that sort of insight into our future design. We're fundamentally changing the whole design, and so literally that as it is probably isn't going to be realistic. We're working with Digital Labs to work on that, but exactly the whole point of what I'm doing here is trying to demonstrate that this has value. This is what we can do, even just on one example. So we need to take this sort of learning, maybe not necessarily this specific learning in this specific context, like literally going, make it live, go now, but we can take what we've learned. I mean, I will be taking what I've learned from this and feeding it back in. I'm involved in the process of doing the design and implementation of our new designs. So you believe me, I will be advocating the heck out of this. I will. Did you? So have I, my friend. So have I. Q? Oh. Yeah. I mean, obviously, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not showing you the whole page. There's loads of stuff under here. I didn't take anything away that we already had. My design has everything in it that one has. I just couldn't put the whole page on the screen because, there's only so much PowerPoint you've got, and then you guys have got to see it from the back. So there is stuff underneath. I've hidden some of it under here, and I say hidden, it's just made it available if users actually have to click. There's this myth in user experience that the more clicks someone has to go through to get to something, the worse the experience is. That is not true. As long as it makes sense, and as long as it's intuitive. There's a guy called Steve Krug that extolled the virtue of do not make me think. If you can make everything intuitive, and the more you have to think about something, the more cognitive load and the harder it is to do, the less people are likely to put up with it. If clicking something is a natural thing for a user to do without them really having to think about it, it's just instinctive, that's absolutely fine. It's an accordion. It says further policy details. During the testing, I made sure to check that people could find it, and it was fine. So there is a lot of stuff to be looked at, and like I said, there is a lot of consultation that you have to balance. There's pure UX. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd hardly have any text on the page, and it would just be buy our insurance. It's cheap, cool. Can't do that, sadly. So yeah, there would be more facets to this. This is not a complete process. It's a sample of what can be done. Anyone else? Anyone? No, this was literally just our own. I picked post office because the screenshot I had for the original one happened to be post office, and I thought, well, I can see what it looks like now. I'll just use post office, but it could be any brand. So no, it was purely internal BGL employees were consulted only. Sorry, Paul, you have one? Yeah, just a quick one on the Izod method. It's going to be adopted, totally. Well, the reason I didn't do it on the actual page was because I was trying to test the visual hierarchy of the page. Now, the problem you have with that is if you're testing that page, you've got all the copy, and so you are affected by the information. Naturally, if you show someone a page and it's got a price on it and it's insurance, people will automatically move to that, whatever. The whole purpose of the squint test was to look at the visual hierarchy. So not the copy, just looking at what was distinct by its presentation. And that's why later on, we then did the testing with the copy in, and we moved on to that. But the initial tests were purely a visual hierarchy test, and including understandable text copy can affect that. Yeah, I mean, if you would, again, yeah, if you had a full-on process, you would probably go and do A/B user testing with the same. You do task-based testing where you'd give a customer, your test participant a task of like, find how many drivers you've got on this policy, and then you'd give them the first one, and you give them the second one, or you might give 50% of your testees. Your test participants, can't call them testes, that doesn't work well. You give 50% of them one, 50% of the other, and you compare. But again, that's kind of like a bigger process. I wasn't that scientific. I had stickers and some drawing and hardly any time. But, you know, the Izod method, TM, is proven scientifically, and also it's well easy. If you go, hey, can I bother you for 5 minutes to do a usability test? It involves sticking stickers on a bit of paper. Oh, God, yeah, I'm in on that. You wouldn't believe how many people love stickers. Anyone else, or shall we leave it on the sticker note? We'll leave it on the sticker note. I'll be over in Speaker's Corner if anyone wants to come and talk to me. Please, I'll be lonely. Cheers, guys.